Neon Science, the brilliantly bright Neon Science set. Exciting experiments that sparkle and glow. Make your very own wearable sparkly neon nails. Cool! Crystal-winged fairy with her own sparkly light-up fairy door. And a glow-in-the-dark glittering neon nightlight jar. Discover the ultra-bright world of Neon Science. From John Adams.
Laser Battle Hunters. Battle against a self-driving smart car. Fire your laser cannon. Got it! Fight up to 7 battle hunters. The enemy hides, slides, and shoots. Down to 2. Fire! You win! Laser Battle Hunters radio control cars from Character.
Cry babies, now
Can you help me? They're both crying.
Give them their passy and they will stop crying.
Don't worry.
The cry babies really, really cry.
Each sold separately.
Bakugan. Now you can join the battle for the fate of 2 worlds. Choose your Bakugan and roll into battle to unleash your power and emerge victorious. With Dragonoid, Trox, and Howlcore, there's a whole world of Bakugan you can collect, battle, and win. Bakugan from Spin Master.
Rescue, reveal, and heal with Scruff's Surprise Vet Rescue. Open the vet bag, rubs to magically heal them. There's 24 you can collect and they'll love you forever. Vet Rescue with Scruff's Surprise, each sold separately.
Hello, I'm Olivia Dickinson and I'm here to talk to you today about the Let Toys Be Toys campaign and how to challenge gender stereotypes in childhood. Those TV ads we just showed were for a variety of toys in the UK, and we'll be looking at more examples of how toys are still being marketed to boys and girls in 2020. So the Let Toys Be Toys campaign is asking the toy and publishing industries to stop limiting children's interests by promoting some toys and books as only suitable for girls and others as only for boys. The real aim is about challenging stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and about challenging sexism in childhood. And we found that the most effective way to do that is through what people can see. So in marketing, in advertising, in packaging, what they see in the shops, in media, and in publishing. So before I get into the detail, I want to just pose a question for you to hold in your heads while I talk. So in a shop, if construction, action and technology toys are labelled boys and role-play dolls and arts and crafts toys are labelled girls, does it matter? So we think it matters, but I want to take you through why it matters. 22% of physics A-level students in 2019 were girls, and 23% of English literature A-level students were boys in 2019. That 22% has stayed static at around 20% for the last 20 years of A-level students being girls. And the English literature 80-20 split has also remained much the same. 11% of the UK engineering workforce is female and 11% of UK nurses in the NHS are male. Now, women do make up more than 3/4 of the NHS workforce, but still a minority in senior roles, even though I'm sure, as some of you know, doctors are now nearly 50% women. Men account for 96% of the prison population in England and Wales, but they also account for 75% of suicides in the UK. And suicide is the most common cause of death among men aged 20 to 49, from research from the Samaritans and the Mental Health Foundation. The Samaritans attribute some of the fact that so many men are the ones who kill themselves to the norms and expectations around masculinity and the lack of communication around emotional literacy. 37% of female students at mixed-sex schools have personally experienced sexual harassment, and yet from the age of 6, girls believe that brilliance is a male trait. So before the age of 6, they're quite happy for girls and boys to both be brilliant and geniuses, and then it starts to change. And then to take the tone down, 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner in England and Wales. So I've probably completely depressed you with these figures, and you were thinking this was going to be a fun presentation from the adverts about toys and how they're marketed and how they're advertised and how children play with them. But these figures are why it matters, and I'll tell you more about how all those statistics are tied up with those gender stereotypes that children are experiencing from very early on. So we really think that the signs and the stereotypes those signs represent matter. They affect self-image and self-esteem. They limit job expectations and life aspirations. Children should decide for themselves what they think is fun. Toys are for fun, for learning, for stoking imagination and encouraging creativity. And play matters. Children need a wide range of play to develop different skills, and often that gets forgotten. They need what we call a varied play diet so that they get the chance to experience different types of play, whether that's to help with their communication skills or their fine motor skills. And then the marketing matters, because children do tend to want to follow rules, and if they see certain things are not allowed for them, then they will follow that. And then those stereotypes are feeding into those limiting job expectations and some of those statistics I've already shown you. So the Let Toys Be Toys campaign started in 2012, and over the first 2 years we had huge success getting shops to take down gendered signs down in the toy aisles. We used social media, mainly Twitter and some Facebook, followed it up with some meetings and emails. And we've also looked at the websites and the catalogues that some of these big stores produce as well. So this is an example, The Entertainer, of one of our first successes, where they changed the dolls and other toys being called girls' toys and the Lego and construction as boys' toys. And you can see in that picture that there is now a construction toys sign with a boy and a girl at one of their stores. So in those first 2 years, 15 retailers committed to Let Toys Be Toys, including Marks and Spencer's, John Lewis. This is another example where Debenhams had girls and boys, and they now have vehicles and characters. We've asked them to categorise the toys by what the toy actually is, rather than who it maybe is supposed to be played with. We also launched Let Books Be Books on World Book Day in 2014. So there were books like this being published. We think the cookery book particularly. Apparently boys and girls are supposed to both cook and eat different food. If you look at the recipes, they are quite different. So the Let Books Be Books campaign has had some brilliant support from children's laureates like Anne Fine and Mallory Blackman, as well as Carol Ann Duffy, Philip Pullman, John Doherty and Catherine Johnson. And so 11 publishers in total have now agreed to stop publishing those gendered titles. So titles where it specifically says it's for girls or for boys, including Usborne, Penguin Random House and Scholastic. We also wanted a way of recognising and highlighting toy and book retailers that were getting it right and marketing toys to children in an inclusive way. And so at the end of 2013, we launched our Good Practice Awards scheme called Toymark. And we now have over 50 shops who've received the award, and you can go and find those shops on our website. And they are all independent retailers, so do seek them out. So toys and books in these shops are labelled or displayed by theme, age or activity. There's nothing to do with gender. No girls or boys signposting is used, including no gender filters on websites, and there's no display signage or imagery that implies certain things are for boys or girls. So if it, for example, if there's some pink or blue colour coding. But you must be thinking, was it always like this? Depending on how old you are or how old your parents are, some of these adverts will be familiar. So these old Lego and Argos ads from the 70s and 80s. So you can see Fisher-Price and Lego contrasting to the more recent Argos catalogue page on the far right. So this current extreme gender segregation of the market started in the 1990s, and we hear from a much older generation of people that the current segregation feels a lot worse than they've ever seen it before. So we think it was a combination of increased consumerism, parents becoming able to find out the sex of their baby in the 80s, so that also brought in the boy-girl split for babies onwards. And then another reason, according to Dr. Elizabeth Sweet, was it was partly a reaction to the women's revolution in the 70s and the 80s, the one where we all grew up, with an emphasis on the inherent differences between men and women. So then toy manufacturers were then trying to emulate that and thinking there's inherent differences between girls and boys and trying to create two sets of the same thing. So what this has meant is that in 2015, the Young Women's Trust found that 1 in 3 young women aged 18 to 30 think men are better suited to being an IT technician compared to 10% of older women aged 31 and over, not much older, but 31 and over. And 66% of these older women, so women 30 plus in 2015, thought people of both genders could be a plumber, and only 40% of younger women agreed with them. So there's become this massive change in the generation of what young women particularly think that they're capable of. A third of young women also thought nursing and caring were better suited for women than men, and just 13% of older women felt the same. So while we know there have been moves since 2012 to make the toilet aisles less segregated, partly down to some of our campaigning, there is still a lot of this gender stereotyping, and I'm going to take you through how children experience it. So as you can see from some of these pictures, this is the pink and blue divide that they experience even before they're born. The whole pink and blue history is very interesting. You can read up a lot more about it. But one thing I'd like to talk about is what's called innocent socialisation. So this is where parents particularly, but also other adults around children, might use the slightest look or touch in a different way to boys and girls. So it might show approval or disapproval about toy choices. They might use a different tone about certain things, or even just the way they talk to their babies and their children. So, for example, parents are often more physically adventurous with their boys. They expect them to be able to climb that higher slide. They throw them around more, but they may also punish them more harshly. They talk to boys less than to their girls, and they're less likely to discuss emotion with boys, except anger. So they're giving boys the words for anger, but not the boys' words for other emotions. And they're also sadly less likely to read to their boys or to take them to the library. And then we find, as we move on, so from babyhood, this is what children are starting to experience. So we've got here some examples of clothes and toys and books. So we find that toys and books, and even clothes, to be honest, mainly have themes of action, adventure, science, space and transport. And they tend to miss themes around caring and nurturing or arts and craft. And then toys and books marketed to girls are more focused on beauty, imagination, caring, cooking and cleaning, as you can see from one example, and stories about princesses or romance, and overall feature much more passive play. But we know that girls enjoy a wide variety of active play and interests that just aren't always reflected in those choices. And then the clothes themselves can often have some really quite negative slogans on, and there are more I'm sure you can look up. So all of these examples are showing how toys and books are perpetuating these arbitrary gender stereotypes. One book that we'd like to recommend, and a Twitter account as well, is Gender Police, a Diary, where a mum and a dad followed that unconscious bias that children were experiencing day to day, from their own parents, from grandparents, from childcare workers, teachers, strangers on the bus, and just that whole sense of how they were being treated differently. I've also got a video I'm going to show very briefly of how different adults behaved when some boy babies and girl babies had their clothes and names swapped.
Look, what does this say? Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Ooh, look at this, Sophie. One, two, three. Ah. Beep, 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 beep. Do you want to see my robot?
She's picked out the robot, the car, the puzzle game. And I think she's been much more physical in handling the child than the other adults have been with girls.
It will make me think the next time I'm with a child, so my niece or my nephew, to make sure that I am actually being sort of fair and equal with all of them, and just giving each child an opportunity to just be whoever they are.
So as you'll have seen in those TV clips, children were being treated very differently depending on what they were wearing. And so what I want to take you through now is how particularly girls experience that gender identity. So these show mostly TV shows that are on in the UK for preschoolers. Often there's a group where there's only one girl, and the girl is often in pink. So we've got Go Jetters and PJ Masks, Peter Rabbit, Paw Patrol. And then I've also put in some of the books because there are studies that show that of the top 100 picture books published in the last few years, the lead character is twice as likely to be male. And only 2 books showed BAME girls in central roles. And 73 of creatures given a gender with male, because a lot of picture books obviously have animals and non-human characters, and yet they were still assigned male. So neuroscientist Professor Melissa Hines says between the ages of 2 to 3, children start to understand they are boys and girls. This is when girls may start to show preference for pink. However, at this stage, both sexes don't realise they will still be male or female as they get older, which can worry them. So Professor Carrie Piekter has then coined the frilly dress syndrome. So if a girl likes climbing trees or playing with cars, they also opt for pink frilly dresses to confirm to themselves and others they're really still girls. So children are just becoming conscious of their gender between ages 3 and 4, and they don't realise it's permanent until the age of 6 or 7. And these TV shows and some of these books are aimed particularly at those ages. Children then often experience what we call gender policing from other children, so from their peers, but also maybe from other adults in nurseries or schools, where they are told that certain things should not be for them because they're a boy or a girl. And again, for some of these small children, this is part of them understanding their own identity. The other way that children can experience other stereotypes is through TV ads, and you'll have seen at the very beginning of the presentation some examples of those. We did a big survey of TV ads in 2015, and we're about to repeat it as it's 5 years old. And we found that in 2015, boys and girls were largely shown playing separately. Very different colour and sound palettes, lots of different language and levels of activity. So these are the words that were used most in adverts that either featured girls or were obviously aimed at girls. So girls were indoors, they were largely inactive unless they were dancing. All of the ads were about appearance and pretend play, being sparkly, doing their nails. You can see from the words, things like magic and princess and friendship. We're quite hopeful that science at least appears. And then no ads for fashion dolls featured a boy. And boys and girls wouldn't really only ever feature together if they were playing a board game. And then even then it might be that the girl might be looking on. Then this is what the boys got. So theirs is all about power and action and control. It's all verbs and doing and fighting and building and weapons. So can you see how we're getting the connections to the statistics early on around domestic violence, prisoners and mental health? So we believe that boys and girls are more alike than different, and by reinforcing that difference, it actually makes being a girl or being a boy the most important thing about that child. It makes them think they have to behave in that way. You may have observed differences in the boys and girls you know, or the children you yourself have, but given all the stereotyping they've been exposed to since birth, is it not surprising that that is how some of them end up behaving? Also, you may have actually experienced differences between the boys you know and the girls you know, so that there are often more differences between those boys and between those girls than between a boy and a girl. So we have a hashtag more alike than different, and we love sharing pictures of boys and girls playing together, which actually they do all the time. I'm going to show you a clip now that's about that plastic brain and how it gets shaped and formed by what it's being exposed to.
I've come to see Professor Gina Rippon, one of the country's leading experts in neuroimaging, to see if there's something about how the children's brains work that could explain it.
What are the differences between boys' and girls' brains anatomically?
$64,000 question. Structurally, there appears to be very, very few differences, which is quite a surprise to a lot of people who have assumed for hundreds of years that males and females are different because their brains are different. So you couldn't look at a brain scan and say, oh, that's a brain scan of a male or a brain scan of a female.
That really doesn't explain why boys and girls might behave differently then. If you say the structure of the brains are, there's no differentiation between the structure.
Well, the other thing that we now know about is that the brain is very, very plastic, mouldable, changeable, that something isn't necessarily fixed and invariant, which is what was always thought about the brain. What we now know is that brain development is very much entangled with society, experiences, upbringing, and the differences we're seeing are not because they were determined at the moment of conception. It's because this hungry brain arrives in the world, and the world is instantly plunging it into a tsunami of pink and blue. And I think we have not been aware till recently of how big that influence is.
So Professor Gina Rippon was talking on a TV programme called No More Boys and Girls, which was a documentary made a few years ago about trying to take all the gender stereotypes away from the classroom and even in the homes of some of these children. And it had incredible results, and it's worth looking up. Don't boys grow up to be nurses, artists, teachers, cooks, and even dads? Don't girls grow up to be astronauts, doctors, builders, architects, and explorers? Yet the effect of stereotype marketing on these children in their day-to-day lives is having a huge effect on how they grow up and make those life choices. So what can we and what can you do to challenge and preempt those effects and choices? We can try to head off the way boys are being directed only to active investigation, gross motor skills and spatial play, and girls to passive relational appearance and domestic play, and that girls are often being told to do arts and crafts and sit quietly in a corner, and boys are allowed to run around and get dirty. All of those different play experiences have an effect on things like language development. So it might be that often boys are seen to be less good at reading and talk a bit later, but that might also be the types of play they've experienced and the interactions they've had with adults. Physical confidence for girls and spatial play for girls in terms of how they're interacting with the world around them. And all of this has a massive effect on their self-belief and what they've experienced. So it's not just what skills they then end up finessing, but it's about removing certain interests as if you're saying certain things aren't for them. So there's been some progress in terms of how adverts particularly are portrayed, and in 2017 the Advertising Standards Authority, the UK's independent regulator of advertising across all media, and this includes catalogues and online ads, did a report, Depictions, Perceptions and Harm, which we were part of the consultation. And so since July 2019, so over a year now, there is now the rule that advertisements must not include gender stereotypes that are likely to cause harm or serious widespread offence. So ads can be targeted and feature a specific gender, but shouldn't explicitly convey that a particular children's product, pursuit, activity, or a play, type of play or career is inappropriate for one or another gender. So there were 3 ads banned by July 2020. One of them was the one you can see, you do the girl boss, we'll do the SEO thing. Another was an ad for Philadelphia that perpetuated a harmful stereotype of suggesting men were incapable of being dads and caring for their children. And a Volkswagen ad that showed a woman with a pram and all the men in much more adventurous roles. Now, that is progress, and that it's good that that clause exists, but interestingly no ads aimed at children have yet been banned, so it might be worth you looking out and seeing which ones might be breaking stereotypes. Then on the other side, we've got this brilliant picture from the winning team from the EACA EdCon competition we had last year, which was choosing to portray how harmful gender stereotypes are to children's health. And we just love it, this ad campaign, which you can look up online. One day we would love it to go live. Then the other area that I'm sure you're all thinking about is, what about education? What about early years? What about schools? What about university? So we do offer resources for schools. We have a very popular 10 ways to challenge gender stereotypes in the classroom, which are all about getting teachers and staff in schools to think about the different ways that they might be using language. We also offer lesson plans from reception right up to Key Stage 3. We have different discussion material that you could just take from the website. And then we have some articles about something we're often quite bothered about how boys are encouraged not to read and to not read girls or to read female authors, and that often things like a boy-orientated curriculum or the myth that boys don't read is still perpetuated in schools. So Partly inspired by the No More Boys and Girls TV programme that Gina Rippon was featured from, we did a teacher survey to find out what teacher training was like, both now and from when some older teachers have been trained. And we discovered that only 19% of teachers were advised as part of their initial teacher training to challenge gender stereotypes, but they weren't actually always given the ways to do that. And a quarter of teachers said that their training actually reinforced gender stereotypes. And 8 out of 10 teachers have not been offered any continuous training, so continuing professional development, in the last 5 years about challenging those gender stereotypes or about unconscious bias. So we really think that there is definitely room for improvement in terms of the training that can be given to teachers. And we would really love the DFE, the Department for Education, and the Government Equalities Office to create a fund dedicated to equalities training, so that all sorts of places that are educating our children can understand how unconscious bias works and how gender stereotypes are impacting on them. So there was a report by the NEU, the teaching union and UK Feminista, about sexism in schools, and they recommended that the new statutory curriculum for relationships and sex education, which has just come in this term, there ought to be in that education about sexism among children and understanding gender stereotypes. Now, that new statutory guidance is out and it does look hopeful, but as I said, it's only just been started to be taught this term and it's been delayed a bit because of COVID, so we shall see what happens. We'd love it for the Government Equalities Office to consider a public awareness campaign about the effects and harm of gender stereotypes on children and how that affects not only their life chances but their emotional well-being. So one approach that often can work is a whole school approach, and so those logos I've put up there, Lifting Limits, the Institute of Physics and Gender Action, they're all leading the way in how you can apply a whole school approach to both sexism and challenging gender stereotypes at both primary and secondary level. And the Fawcett Society at the moment has a commission on gender stereotypes in early childhood, which will report very soon, and we're involved with that. Thank you very much for coming to my talk, and I look forward to taking questions shortly.